2 weeks ago, I made this video showing what happens when you try to play Crimson Desert on an Intel Arc GPU. Now, believe it or not, this was actually an improvement over the state of the game at launch, where it just literally wouldn't run at all. However, once you actually got into any type of scene with any geometry in it and were trying to play, you got scenes like this, so it really wasn't actually playable at all in my testing, which was done on an Arc B580 on a system with a Ryzen 5 5600X. And this is showing what the game in that particular scene was supposed to look like running on an NVIDIA GPU. And so that was the state of Intel at launch. Well, the actual launch day, you couldn't launch the game at all. So what I was showing in this video is that this was technically an improvement. There was a lot of controversy when the game first launched, where the game developers had basically refused any help from Intel engineers to try to get the game up and running on Intel hardware prior to launch, and they officially had stated that the game was unsupported and on Intel Arc GPUs and just to get a refund. However, they did change their tune and say that they would start working on support. Now, today, I noticed this article at videocards.com saying that Crimson Desert now runs on Arc B580 with Intel's new driver, but FSR can break the game, so I thought this would be worth investigating. So I've tested it out, and we're going to take a look at what happened, but also, there was kind of mixed reports here, because like Intel Arc was apparently, well, in the Intel Arc subreddit, there was a post saying Crimson Desert works on the new driver. However, there was a lot of discussion in this saying that, some people were saying it was working, some people were saying it's not, and some people saying that it still has a lot of visual issues. So in other words, there could be issues despite it apparently now at least being better than it was. Now also, I wanted to isolate in this video two different things. The game has received tons of patches. So is it patches from the game that has improved things, or is it the latest Intel driver that has improved things? So I've tested those out separately. So the first thing that we're going to look at is me launching the game after downloading the latest game update, which was released a couple of days ago, and filming this on April, the 9th? Anyway, but this is without downloading the newer GPU driver. So this is using the same GPU driver as in my previous video. I will link this previous video in the video description if you want to check out that in more detail. So, trying to launch the game, and at first it seems to hang for a second, but then it does actually kick in and launch the game. It compiles shaders, which doesn't take a long time because I've already compiled shaders on this driver version on this PC. I'm using the same Intel Arc B580 on the same Ryzen 5 5600X based system. I then go into load a game. I confirm that I'm on the minimum graphic settings at a native 1080p with FSR off, just to confirm the graphic settings, and then go to load a game. And we get into game loading. And what happens? Well, it does load, but it was already doing that previously. And I was mostly curious, what would this look like? He's still missing part of his face and everything looks kind of blue. And it also continues to look weird as we get into, I'm going to set this to like 2x playback speed. So this is playing back at 2 times the normal speed now. This looks a little bit different than it did on the previous driver, where I'm seeing just some black space and then the bar of normalness beneath it. So things look a little bit different. And remember, this is on the same driver, but there's been updated game patches. But then it loads in and looks like this, so we're kind of having that same issue that we were having on the previous version. But I also noticed I was loading into a different area of the game than I had in the previous video testing, and that I was getting kind of this blue and black color instead of the sort of, I don't know if it's salmon and black color that we got previously. So I tried loading into a different area to see the same area that I had in the previous video, but this is what it looks like, and we do get those same exact issues that I had before. So, long story short, the patches to the game do not seem to have improved the situation on Intel Arc GPUs. So then the next thing to investigate is, what about the Intel Arc drivers themselves? So now I installed the latest Intel Arc driver, which seems to be dated as of April 7th. So downloaded that driver, did a fresh install on that. and then tried to launch the game. Now, this is still the patched version of the game, so the same version I was just looking at, but now where the only change in variable is the Intel driver. So, takes a while to start the game. Seemed like it was kind of hanging, but it did get to the splash screen, and then it did get to compiling shaders. I'm going to skip ahead on that because this took longer, because usually when you install a new driver, it does take a while to compile shaders because they do need to recompile the shaders on the new driver version. I load the In Ashes save, which is the first one I tried on the previous driver here that had kind of the blue background, and it does seem to load in. I'm like, okay, but this is pretty much just what we were seeing before. Is there going to be anything different? And this is an improvement. You can see his actual textures. Now, he also is still missing part of his face. So that seems to be a problem. And the comments mentioned in my previous video, it confirms he is airheaded. There is nothing in there. There is no brain, at least modeled out. But anyway, you do see eyeballs. So that looked weird. And then I was wondering, okay, so what happens when we get into the actual loaded area? And look, okay, this is actually a major improvement. You can somewhat play the game. And I, was running around here, and then it gets to the cutscene, and you notice, okay, it's not just pieces of his face that are missing, it's like everybody's, and there's parts of the body missing and everything, so definitely some major issues with the rendering of the game. So it's significantly better than it was, but it's still pretty bad. I also thought I'd check out that other game save load to see what was going on with that. And so I loaded into that one, and we see the same thing where we can't actually see most of his textures and things like that, but parts of his face are missing. And then I loaded into the actual game area. And like I said, it's actually in a state that you could deem as, able to navigate the game world, which is a big improvement. But I was noticing that performance wasn't amazing and the GPU wasn't drawing a lot of power, so then I actually got suspicious that I didn't have Resizable BAR enabled on my PC. And it turns out that when I went into my PC BIOS settings, that actually that was the case. Somehow my PC had reset its BIOS settings and everything had been disabled. So I turned Resizable BAR on and loaded it up to see if we'd get better performance. Now, Resize BAR on or off shouldn't affect any of those rendering issues that we were seeing, but it could impact performance. So I was hoping that by kicking on Resizable BAR, and to be clear here, well, with AMD and NVIDIA GPUs, turning on Resizable BAR can improve performance in certain games. With Intel Arc graphics GPUs, you're basically mandated. They say it's just not supported to use Intel Arc GPUs without Resizable BAR. And what you should notice here is that performance numbers are significantly higher. Now, this is still outside of the actual gameplay section, so let's jump forward in the recording here. And here's the actual gameplay recording section. Now, keep in mind that this is minimum settings at 1080p native, no upscaling, no FSR, but we are over 70 FPS now, which is significantly higher than what we were seeing before. But like I said, enabling Resizable BAR, while it did fix some of my performance problems, it did not fix the rendering issues. We're still noticing huge sections of the characters just simply completely gone. But we're actually at playable performance here, actually well over 60 FPS, and it seems to be a pretty big improvement there, so that's good. So, I mean, you could play the game like this, although the characters are going to look completely ridiculous. So I then decided to check out what about turning up the graphics settings? Because we were at minimum settings, and we're now over 60 FPS at native resolution. So I decided to switch over to ultra graphic settings, and then I noticed it took a really long time to apply them. I'm going to skip way forward in the video. I'm now in like 45 seconds or so. Let's see, let me jump back here a little bit. So yeah, it took about 40 seconds or so to apply the new graphic settings, but they did apply, and now I'm kind of in the mid-40s or so. And I will say that this intro fight scene in this forest area does seem to be a fairly demanding section of the game. So hitting in the mid-40s here is a pretty decent stress test. There are some areas of the game that are more demanding, but this is pretty demanding. Yeah, and kind of getting in the 40s or so. And then I also thought, okay, it's best practice to restart a game when you've changed graphic settings. So I did. So this is a fresh restart on these same ultra graphic settings, just to see if that helped out at all. Again, really long load screen, skipping about a minute ahead. So I'm a minute in here, I'm loaded in, but still kind of in the mid 40s in this scene. So 1080p ultra settings, mid 40s, but we still have the graphical issues. So it did look like the game restart wasn't actually required to get good performance and apply the settings and all that. So next thing I thought I'd try was, what if I try kicking on some upscaling, keeping in mind that I was aware that that might break the game. Not because I would have normally suspected that, but because I had seen this article saying that FSR can break the game, and that was reported by users on this Reddit post. So I thought, okay, let's kick on FSR quality and see what happens. And as soon as I apply it, the game just kind of froze. But I was thinking, okay, when I applied the ultra graphic settings, if I waited long enough, it did eventually apply. But here I just kept waiting and kept waiting and kept waiting. And eventually I turned off the screen recording and just kept waiting, and just nothing happened. I waited a long time. So then I tried restarting the game. I had to Alt F4 and it said like the program's no longer responding. So I Alt F4'd out of the game and tried restarting it, and I just got a spinning wheel. So unfortunately what this means is if you kick on FSR upscaling on the Intel Arc GPUs in the current state of things, it not only crashes the game, but you can't restart the game to try to turn off FSR upscaling. It's just broken. So what do? Well, the only option seems to be to go into the config file. I'll also mention that if you're on an Intel Arc GPU and you're trying to get the game to work and it's broken now, if you had turned on FSR upscaling in the past on like a different game version or different driver version, it's possible that if the game isn't starting for you, because that's another thing that this article had reported, is that some people were saying the game still wasn't starting for them. I'm suspicious if those people already had FSR enabled in the past, and now you're trying to start this game version and driver version, and it crashes the game. So if you're in that situation, or if you turn on FSR and it breaks and you can't start it, you need to go into your config files. So the way you get there for this game, I found, is so you can go to your local disk C, and then you go to users, you click on your username, mine's DANAW, but yours would be different. Now, you have to make sure that your view settings show hidden items, or else you won't see this folder, app data. So you go to app data, you go to local, and then scroll down to the P's, and there should be a Perl Abyss folder. That's the developer for this game. So you open up Perl Abyss, and then you go to CD. So open up CD, then there's save, you open up that, and then there's this user engine option save. Now open that with a text editor like Notepad, and you get what you see behind me here. So in here, I was just searching for FSR to see where it would show up, and it showed up under a few places, but upscale mode select. So I noticed that most things that were off were just the text that said off. So I just deleted FSR, and I replaced it with off within the quotation brackets. I also went ahead and set the render resolution to 100% just in case that would cause any problems either. And then I went File and Save. Then I closed it, I opened it back up just to confirm that it did actually save my changes. Those are set to off and 100%. And then I went ahead and started the game back up. So starting the game back up just to confirm it wasn't broken anymore, and it did eventually work. Again, the game just takes a while to start, which is kind of annoying, but it did eventually start. We're actually hitting the splash screen now. I can get into the menus and change things. So the config file did save the day. So we're kind of hitting the end of the video. So what can I say here? So I can confirm that Crimson Desert now does run better on the Arc B580 with Intel's new driver. However, I can also confirm it's definitely the new driver that seems to have made the difference, not the game patches. So this seems to be an Intel's working on it thing rather than a game developers have fixed it kind of thing, since I tested those separately. Also, I can confirm that FSR does break the game, but I can also confirm that even if you have the game, technically working, he's still missing part of his face, and it's not just him missing part of his face. It's all the characters in the cutscenes and everything. So, yeah, the game is technically running now in a state that you might deem as playable, but clearly still very visually corrupted and broken. So that's where we're at. I hope that this continues being worked on, and I hope that the game developers also maybe put in some time on that. But I know they've been issuing a lot of patches, so I know they're doing a lot of work on the game, and I also understand that Intel Arc GPUs are a very small percentage of the market, so I see why this wouldn't be a high priority right now. Although ideally this would have happened during the game development stage. And like I said in my last video, Intel did reach out and offer support during the game development stage prior to launch, but apparently that had been turned down. And the optics of that happening on an AMD-sponsored game aren't good, but my response to those kind of conspiracy theories that this was like a AMD sponsorship so they intentionally didn't support Arc is, we don't actually have any evidence one way or the other. One data point isn't a pattern, but I will keep my eye out on future AMD-sponsored titles, and if they all end up having issues with Intel Arc GPUs at launch, that would then start to get a little bit more suspicious. So just something to keep an eye on. But anyway, I'm happy to report that Intel is doing work on their drivers to improve the situation. It is better than it was, but people are still missing relevant parts if you try to play the game. So that's where we're at. I hope all of you have an excellent day.